Let's jump right into this explainer. Picture this. It's early morning, you're dragging a bit, and you walk into a coffee shop. Your plan? Just drop $3 or $4 on a simple, small coffee. That's it. But fast forward 5 minutes, and you're walking out the door clutching a massive $7 large drink. Sound familiar? We've all been there. You probably walked out thinking you just made a super smart choice, right? Like you somehow upgraded because it was just such a better value. But today, we're going to unpack the exact science of why that actually happened.
Because what you experienced wasn't an upgrade at all. It was the illusion of choice. I want to completely shatter this assumption of free will right out of the gate today. That little upsell, it was actually an engineered psychological trap. It's a pricing strategy crafted decades ago, and it is used today by the absolute biggest, most successful brands on the planet. They aren't forcing your hand. Instead, they're carefully designing the menu to guide your brain exactly where they want it to go.
So, I really want you to ask yourself, why did you upgrade to that venti? Or think about tech. Why did you buy the premium smartphone when you honestly only needed the basic one? I want to pull you into the mindset of a consumer who's being actively, yet totally invisibly, manipulated every single time you look at a price tag. Let's start with a really basic comparison. Say you have a small coffee for $3 and a large coffee for $7. When you only have these two options, evaluating absolute value is incredibly easy for your brain. Most of us will naturally just look at our wallets, think about how much caffeine we actually need, and choose the cheaper, more rational option. The $3 small easily wins out for the vast majority of people. But, marketers know this, and they have an incredibly clever workaround. So what happens when marketers introduce a behavioral science mechanism called asymmetric dominance? Now, this is widely known as the Decoy Effect. It's this wild phenomenon where your preference between two choices entirely changes just because a third, highly specific option gets added to the mix. This third option is the decoy, and it is asymmetrically dominated. That's a fancy way of saying it's completely inferior to one option, but only partially inferior to the other. Its sole purpose? To shift your brain away from asking how much do I want to spend and force you to ask which option gives me the best deal. And this brilliantly illustrates how the trap actually works out in the real world. Let's look at a classic Starbucks pricing model. We've got a tall at $2, a grande at $2.60, and a venti at $2.95. Notice what happens here. By dropping the venti price so insanely close to the grande, the tall suddenly becomes totally undesirable. The grande is acting as the decoy. It makes the jump to the venti look like an absolute steal. I mean, it's just 35 cents more for a whole lot more coffee. Suddenly, you completely forget you originally only wanted to spend $2, and Starbucks effortlessly drives up their overall revenue. To prove just how powerful this is, let's look at behavioral economist Dan Ariely's famous experiment with The Economist magazine's subscription model. They offered three choices: a web-only subscription for $59, a print-only subscription for $125, and a combined web and print subscription also for $125. Now, that print-only option at $125 seems completely useless, right? I mean, why on earth would you buy just print when you can get print and the web version for the exact same price? Well, when Ariely actually tested this in the real world, the data was just staggering. 0% chose the print-only option. Nobody. But a massive 84% of people chose the combined $125 package, while only 16% went with the cheap $59 option. The decoy, that seemingly useless print-only option, completely flipped our perception of value. When they ran the test without the decoy, the vast majority of people simply chose the cheapest option. That decoy literally exists only to make the most expensive option look like a massive bargain.
Which brings us to Apple's genius pricing trap.
So, okay, we know this works for coffee and magazines, but does this psychological trick scale up? Does it still work when we are talking about hundreds or even thousands of dollars? Let's break down the iPhone 11 launch pricing from our source materials. You've got the standard iPhone 11 at $649. Then you have the iPhone 11 Pro at $999. And finally, the ultra premium iPhone 11 Pro Max at $1,099. Just look at that middle tier for a second. The iPhone 11 Pro is $350 more than the base model, but it's just $100 less than the massive, fully loaded Pro Max. That Pro tier exists almost entirely as a decoy. It's just there to make the $1,099 ultra premium model look like the absolute most logical choice. This is the renowned good, better, best tiering strategy. By presenting three distinct options, massive brands ensure wide market coverage, right? They hit multiple income brackets.
But more importantly, it forces you, the consumer, to completely shift your mental focus. You stop debating a buy or don't buy decision, and instead you start comparing features. You start thinking, well, look, if I'm already spending $1,000, I might as well spend $100 more to get the biggest screen. It is a masterful way to maximize their profit margins.
Let's look at the psychological vulnerability here and why our brains fail so consistently.
This really brings us to the core of this explainer. Why do we fall for this? Why, even when we consider ourselves super rational consumers, does this trap work so flawlessly? The absolutely crucial point here is that human brains are actually terrible at determining absolute value in a vacuum. We rely heavily on what is called the anchoring effect. This is our natural tendency to base our judgments and decisions on an initial piece of information, an anchor, even if that information is completely irrelevant. Once an anchor is set in your mind, every single subsequent argument or estimate you make is adjusted from that starting point.
As foundational behavioral economists Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman put it, anchoring is a heuristic used to make estimates under uncertainty. So when a store shows you an outrageously expensive item first, or they place a decoy right in the middle of a lineup, they are forcefully planting an anchor in your brain. And that anchor dictates your entire expectation of what that product should actually cost. But there is another wild layer here: loss aversion. Think about it. Would you rather lose $2 or lose 8 ounces of coffee? Research shows that humans feel the pain of a loss twice as intensely as the pleasure of a gain. When you're standing right there at the counter comparing a small and a large, your brain enters this intense little battle. You are actually more averse to the loss of product quantity or quality than you are to losing just a little bit of money, so you upgrade, simply to avoid the psychological pain of missing out on the better item.
Now, if the decoy effect isn't being used to push you to the top tier, brands will absolutely use the compromise effect. This taps into our natural human tendency to just avoid extreme choices. We don't want to look cheap by buying the absolute smallest option, but we also don't want to feel wasteful by buying the most expensive option. So what do? We compromise. We pick the median option. Marketers literally construct the extreme choices specifically to make that middle option, which happens to be the one they wanted to sell you all along, completely irresistible. But the manipulation gets even more subtle through menu design. Neuroscientists have actually found that we process small numbers faster on the left and large numbers faster on the right, so menus are organized linearly left to right just to seamlessly match your brain's processing speed. Furthermore, premium brands will price items ending in 0.95 instead of 0.99 simply because it signals high quality rather than a cheap discount. And honestly, perhaps the most devious trick of all, removing the currency symbol entirely. That's right. The dollar sign is actually a negative symbol to your brain. It literally reminds you of the pain of paying. Studies documented in our source material show that simply removing the dollar sign from a menu increases the average consumer spending by a massive 8%. 8%! That means our brains are completely rewired just by removing a tiny little squiggle from a piece of paper. Crazy, right? All of these tactics work together to manage your cognitive load. This is just the amount of mental effort you're using during decision-making. If a brand gives you 20 choices, you experience cognitive overload and decision paralysis. You might just get overwhelmed and leave without buying anything. So, by carefully curating choices down to 3 or 4 specific options, the good, the better, the best, they reduce your cognitive load and smoothly, effortlessly guide you right to the checkout counter.
Which brings us to our final section: the takeaway and how to spot the trap. So how do we actually fight back against this? Now that we've pulled back the curtain on how our brains are being hijacked, it's time to empower you. Here is a super simple 3-step checklist to use before you make your next purchase. Step 1, set your absolute budget before you even look at the options. Knowing your absolute limit stops the anchoring effect dead in its tracks. Step 2, mentally cross out the middle option to see if you're just falling for the compromise effect. Evaluate the low and high options purely on their own merits. And step 3, actively hunt for the decoy. If there is a price point that seems awkwardly close to a much better product, or an option that seems utterly useless compared to the others, boom, you've found the decoy. Find the option that makes absolutely no sense. That is the trap. And I promise you, once you see it, you can never unsee it. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. But before you go, ask yourself one last question. The next time you pull out your credit card, who is really making the purchase? You or the menu designer?